investing is personal, right? Like even if you are working for a big company as Prosus Group and Prosus Ventures, you're bringing your character to the table and you're investing in the character of teams that resonate with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whoever tells you it's not personal is and it's programmatic, or it's not true.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Profit to the People, the official podcast of Republic, where we believe you have the power to invest in the future you believe in. I'm your host, Lisa Carmen Wang, head of brand at Republic, and I'll be taking you behind the scenes to meet the investors, founders in our community who share their insights on the future of investing and how they're bringing profit to the people. If you're interested in investing, head over to republic.co and follow us on all socials at Join Republic and at Lisa Carmen Wang. Today, I'm here with Banafsheh Fathieh, also known as B. She is the head of America's investments at Prosus Ventures, focused on innovative consumer technology investments. Prior to Prosus, B was part of the founding team and a vice president of OCV Partners, an LA-based venture growth fund. B has served in various operating, investment management, investment banking, and advisory roles in her career and brings over a decade of experience around startups and venture capital. B is all about investing in moonshots, and she's opened up so many markets within her role at Prosus. So I'm excited to welcome B to Profit to the People.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
So to get us started, how do you define a moonshot?
I think moonshots at the end of the day are companies that really aim to break barriers, right? So, and I mean, whatever that barrier might be, and they might be sort of more experimental in nature. So there might be some, massive technical risk with what they're trying. It might be a new market segment, a new customer segment that's maybe is underserved and, has historically been completely neglected, breaking that barrier. So moonshots, I think at their core, just have a very different risk profile than maybe a typical investment, definitely in the traditional world, but that even more so than what you see in a typical venture investment. It's, if you were to kind of define the risk spectrum, it's definitely on the side of the risk spectrum that most people would sort of look at you with a degree of skepticism, and maybe the tagline would be, you're crazy to try that, or, that will never work. That's usually a moonshot bet, is when people tell you continuously that will never work. That's a good indicator that you're, starting to go into moonshot territory.
Awesome. So then tell us about your role at Prosus Ventures and how you got into this line of work.
Sure. So maybe stepping back and speaking a little bit about Prosus Group first, and then we'll go into Prosus Ventures and then my role within Prosus Ventures. So Prosus Group, we're a publicly listed company on the Euronext, and we are actually Europe's largest consumer internet group. So we invest as a group in companies that are really kind of category defining and are looking to service very large consumer needs, primarily in the emerging markets. So some of our key sort of markets are places like China, India, Brazil, broader LATAM, Southeast Asia. So that's really kind of our bread and butter. In terms of Prosus Ventures, we are the venture arm of the Prosus Group, which is this large, again, global conglomerate listed on the Euronext. And our role is quite simple for the group. We're looking for the next sort of high growth category to really kind of add value to our overall portfolio. So we invest in companies that are in markets and in segments that are very large TAM. They tend to, I would say, largely look to provide access to consumer services that are maybe lacking in some of the geographies that we operate in. And again, the eye is always towards what you define as a moonshot, or companies that again are going to be on a growth trajectory that is really atypical of most companies. So that's what we tend to invest in. And in terms of my role within the group, I am our head of investments here in America. So I cover North and South America broadly from a geographic perspective. But I also wear sort of a secondary hat, which is I lead all of our frontier investments. So those categories include things like blockchain, synthetic biology, anything really with a kind of a deep science bent to it tends to come across my desk. And really, again, my role is to kind of spearhead a lot of these companies, categories, and geographies from an investment perspective, so that, again, we have some broad-based exposure to some of the themes that we see as emerging.
And in order for a company to be a moonshot, it needs to solve a really big problem. So can you tell us about some of the problems that you're most passionate about solving through investing?
Things like access to financial services, so financial inclusion is a big theme that I care about. Access to consumer services that again might be lacking. So there's things like e-commerce. So anything that really kind of enables e-commerce penetration in some of the geographies we're involved in. So anything again that makes the bottom of the pyramid slightly wider is a theme that I tend to care about. That tends to be across a whole host of categories. I would say front and center for me on most days are probably financial access, just because that tends to have a trickle down effect in terms of sort of how the lives of consumers are impacted. So, if a consumer can have access to things like banking services, more importantly, credit, that tends to impact their sort of overall quality of life. So those are, again, themes that are very near and dear to my heart.
And why is that, in terms of your personal background?
Yeah, so I grew up in Iran, which is, I would say, was one of the most beautiful childhoods that you could have. But obviously, Iran has had its challenges when it comes to, I guess, macro inclusion on the global sort of economic scene. But also within Iran, there is obviously very little access to credit. So I think, I've seen from sort of the inside out what it means to lack things like access to credit, banking services, to be blocked from sort of being able to participate in the broader global economy. And so a lot of these things I've lived through. So a lot of these consumer problems are things that I've definitely seen firsthand and experienced firsthand. I've also lived in environments where currency is less than stable. So I really want to make sure that the type of things that at least I can sort of help in investing in really look to focus and negate some of these problems. Because again, they from a quality of life perspective just tend to be so pervasive. And again, just if you broaden the funnel just a little bit, I think more people in the world will get a fair shake. And that ultimately, I think, is something we can all get behind.
And so you have opened up several new markets and themes for your group, like blockchain, like elder care, like other areas of fintech. What are some of the factors you consider and why you chose to expand into those markets?
Yeah, so I would say, generally in terms of investment style, we're very, very thesis driven. So, I would say the beginning of our process is one where we sort of zoom out, and think to ourselves sort of what are, large geographical markets, what are the needs within those markets, and then we start to double click all the way down until we get to a thesis that that makes sense. But I think first and foremost on that thesis formulation part of the puzzle, it's obviously TAM, right? The addressable market has to be large, whether it's if it's a consumer company, it has to be looking to service a local geography that at the end of the day has enough consumers, right? Has enough of a local population to be able to support that business. And if it doesn't, that the team or the company has to have the aspiration to actually have a regional or if not global focus. So we have to believe that the market, both from, again, if it's a consumer company, has to have the potential to be, the next $1 trillion company. And that again comes from having a wider consumer base. So things that are niche in nature are not that interesting to us as much as they may be pieces of technology or services that are needed in the world just given our scale, they typically don't make it down our investment funnel. So again, for us, first and foremost, TAM is very important. Two, like I said, we obviously are financially motivated investors, but at the end of the day, we have to believe that the company is solving a very big societal need. So it has to be, we care about ultimately, is it solving something for the end consumer that we view as being very, very necessary. So if you look at sort of our broader portfolio, things like education. So we have a lot of money invested in ed tech companies around the world. We're in things like food delivery. These are, again, things that ultimately the consumer interacts with these platforms on a daily, if not, multiple times a day type of consumer behavior. So again, we have to believe that it's a big societal need. So that's kind of tied to the TAM question that I mentioned. And then from there, once we're convinced of market, market opportunity plus size, then it's a matter of, again, picking the right companies. And that, I would say, the biggest factor for us is obviously the team. So the team is so critical in terms of being able to bring the dream to fruition, right? So usually if you get the market right and if you get the team right, they usually can produce a product that lands you in a good place. So I would say those are just a few factors that we consider in our investment process. But again, that's what typically makes something interesting to us or not.
Is there a theme that you've opened up in the last couple of years that you're particularly excited about?
Oh God, there's many, but I would say, like I said, on the financial inclusion side, I helped open up a Mexico for us as a market. We invested in a company called Clar, which is a challenger bank. And I think, we're very excited about, again, just sort of the potential of new entrants and banking systems around the world. So that's one that I definitely find as a new market to be really interesting. And the problem's really hard, honestly. So it's one where I'm really excited for someone to actually be able to solve that problem. So Mexico plus neobanking, I would say, is one thing that I'm very, very excited about. Two, and this is a very sort of canned answer because I think a lot of people are excited about it, is blockchain in particular, right? And financial use cases around blockchain. We've been investing in blockchain since 2014 or 2015. So as I would say, we're generally excited about the potential of the technology. I personally, again, think that things like remittances and global payment settlements to helping with the unbanked, all of these things that are if you look at the potential of the technology, could be 20, 30 years away, but it's one where you don't have to squint too hard to see how it could be very transformative. And that's, putting to the side things like NFTs and the ability to create online economies and, all the other applications that, blockchain bears to fruit. But, for me, I think that's one where, putting all the other sort of STEAM themes aside, blockchain is one where I can see, again, in 30 years' time, it's tough to make the argument that the technology won't have a very, very transformative effect.
Amazing. You mentioned the team. So what are some of the traits you look for in the entrepreneurs and companies you invest in?
Yeah, I think lots of things. And this is such we get asked this a lot. And some of it is, I think, more intuitive and some of it is sort of characteristics that you can articulate. But, I over-index for some things, which I'm sure other investors maybe don't. But for me, I over-index on ambition. You want a founder that, like I said, it's some of these problems, especially if you're looking to, serve 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion people globally, it takes outsized ambition and vision, right? There is no sort of complacency around sort of, oh, well, we're a $100 million company now, let's just pack our bags and go home. That itch to make something, to create something really impactful in the world is something that I think is just core to really great founders. I over-index for things like honesty, integrity, leadership skills. These are, again, at the end of the day, things that if you are to, as much as you might have all the ambition in the world, if you don't have a team behind you, it's very difficult to conquer the world. world, right? So the founder has to be able to mobilize an army behind him. And if they really don't have those types of sort of leadership qualities, it's going to be tough to do that. So, definitely look for founders that have that ability as well. And then finally, I think grit. This word gets thrown around a lot, but that extreme sense of resiliency, because no company that I've been involved with hasn't had ups and downs. And it has, usually you have high highs and then there's low lows and then there's high highs again. And it's very rarely a sort of a linear relationship with success, right? It just tends to kind of, again, if you zoom out, maybe you start to see the wonderful trajectory of growth, but there's a lot of ups and downs. And I think someone who has the ability to, get back up at least one more time tends to be someone that, again, translates to outsized outcomes from an investment perspective. So I'd say those are sort of the soft qualities I tend to over-index for. Again, if you ask 10 investors, I think very few of them will give you the same answer, but those are the types of things that I look for.
And when I look at your investment journey, I mean, you've been in the industry for over a decade, and take us back in terms of, for some of our listeners, they are first-time investors or they're just starting to dip their toes in. How did you get started? Where did you look? What kind of research did you do?
So I've spent a lot of my career actually ping-ponging between sort of investor operator and then investor again. So I spent the first few years of my career doing, investment banking, private equity. A lot of sort of my intention around that was to gather the tool set, right? I think it's very difficult to navigate a global financial system if you don't really have a good orientation of sort of what it even looks like, right? So, coming out of university, that was really my intention, was to really just really gather what this whole thing was about, if you will. And I think there is no better orientation than investment banking. And in some ways, private equity, to really get a good sense of what, that the traditional financial lens looks like. Then I think my first sort of crash course in startups came from joining a startup. So I joined an early stage startup called Otoy, which is actually still around today, where I had a lot of the sort of BD and finance function. And I got to see sort of firsthand what it takes to scale a business and what it means to raise capital from investors and sort of fine tune ultimately that skill set. And it is a skill set. Be able to speak to investors in a language that they appreciate. I was an operator for a few years, really got sort of, again, a front row seat of what that looked like. And then when I jumped back to investor side, for me, it was my experience as an operator was so incredibly valuable because I think it made me hypersensitive to some things. And it also made me have a degree of empathy that I don't think I would otherwise have, because, there's just, again, occupational hazards for being the one that's in the capital seat. And I think it makes me very, very empathetic, again, to the founder journey, because it's, being on the other side of the table sometimes can be really challenging. So, that was, I would say, sort of my journey through, right? It's, again, sort of at the beginning of my career, tool set gathering, middle part of my career, operating and really understanding sort of how to build a business. And then the third part is, again, being sort of a venture capitalist and really, again, trying to take what I had learned as being part of an early team and really kind of translating that to more of an investment perspective.
As a woman in this space as well, and having founded SheWorks, I'm sure you have, it's a highly male-dominated space. So I'd love to know how you have really tapped into your own superpowers and maintained your authenticity as you've grown in your career.
I mean, it's interesting because I in some ways don't know any better, right? Because I've spent all of my career in fields that I tend to be the only woman in the room. And I think part of my super power as a person, it has nothing to do with being a woman, is maybe being a little bit obtuse, right? So I would walk into these rooms and I wouldn't really notice. It was, you were in a room with fellow human beings and we were all sort of there for an intellectual discourse, and hopefully we all brought something to the table that was valuable. And I think that's sort of a testament to how my parents raised me, because that was it was for me never a question, right? It was like, oh, of course you get a seat at the table. Like, is there any other way of thinking? And again, I think that naivety really helped me because again, I would just walk in and I wouldn't notice that there was any difference between me and the person next to me. So I think that again, naivety was something that definitely helped me in the beginning parts of my career. And I get that question a lot of like, how do you not notice? I'm like, I don't know. I just never really noticed. And I think in terms of sort of staying authentic, later in my career, I started to notice that, and this is, I would say in the last 5 years, where there are things that stylistically maybe work for my male colleagues and probably don't work for me, right? And my style as an individual, and whether it's as a woman or as an individual, isn't necessarily one where, I'm hyper aggressive or I elbow sharp elbowed. And that's just not how I do things. It actually has helped me, I think, when the confidence of some founders where, I think my style is much more sort of collaborative, empathetic. I really like to be sort of in the trenches with my founders and really kind of be an extra set of hands at the table. It stylistically fits with a certain type of founder, and it resonates with a certain type of founder. So I think my advice on the staying authentic is male or female, there will always be a type of person that resonates with your style. Find your tribe, find the type of people who really appreciate, what you bring to the table and, where there's a fit. If I was, pursuing a founder that's, just looking for a different ilk of founder, investor, that's likely not going to be a very fruitful long-term relationship. But one that, again, can sort of look at how I do things and appreciate sort of the set of qualities that I bring to the table at the end of the day. That's one that, again, if you're looking for a 10, 15, 20-year partnership is someone that you would want sort of in this battle with you.
Yeah. And I mean, without naming any specifics, are there times where you have walked away from potential investments because, they didn't appreciate that value or it just simply didn't jive?
Yes. I think it's actually more recently than I think historically, because I think there is a little bit of a dynamic of late of mad frenzy, hyper competitive, environment is, on the VC side. And I think it's just by virtue of there being a lot of money, overall a lot of capital in the ecosystem. And I have philosophically, I think that as an early stage investor, I'm not sure I want to follow the herd. And I'm not sure that I want to kind of be in this elbowing your way into these crazy competitive rounds. I think where you make asymmetric returns is catching it before they do, right? So I think that's been sort of what my philosophy has been, and the type of founders that really kind of relish that, hyper competitive, more kind of self-promotional type of investor is one that I think stylistically my style probably wouldn't resonate. So I think it's some of this is, again, highly personal. It's like that type of investor might do very well and that type of founder might do very well. But it goes back to find your tribe. You have to find the set of founders that really kind of speak to your values, and male or female, again, if you can find that appreciation in the other person, I think it makes the journey just that much smoother.
Yeah. And I think that does bring up a big point in that investing is personal, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you are working for a big company as Prosus Group and Prosus Ventures, you're bringing your character to the table, yeah, and you're investing in the character of teams that resonate with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whoever tells you it's not personal is and it's programmatic, or it's just not true. And I think, again, successful founders have a deep sense of self-awareness, right? Again, they know sort of the places where they shine and the places that they don't. They also, again, probably are overweight on fit. I go back to, it's very, very important for you to be able to really sort of jive with the founders that you've backed. I over-index for people. I over-index for having a team that, again, it has these incredibly big visions. And then there are investors that don't, right? And again, there's one style is not better than the other, but for me, the type of founders that have these multi-generational, multi-decade type of vision, and they're looking for collaboration, they're looking for someone with a longer term view, tend to kind of resonate a little bit more stylistically.
Awesome. And what are some mistakes you've made as an investor early on, and how have you applied those lessons to becoming a smarter investor today?
Yeah, it's interesting. So this wasn't while I was at Prosus, but some early career, I would say, learnings were going back to why I'm overweight on people. Because I think sometimes you can get very married to a thesis, right? You can get married to a directional view of the world, and you go out and you try to find the company that resonates and speaks to that thesis. And sometimes you don't assess the founder the way that you should. So I think early on in my career, I invested in a deal where it was just like, it was so a lot that the founder just saw the world and the evolution of a particular topic the way that I did. There were a lot of qualities that they exhibited that, even if I go back and kind of relive the due diligence process, it's like, I don't know, there's something a little bit off. I think the biggest takeaway I from that is, regardless of how married you are to your thesis, don't ignore the red flags when it comes to people. They ultimately make or break an investment, and to really do a character assessment, right? And the other thing is just learning to have strong conviction, loosely held, meaning that if there's evolution in the market that disproves what you believe, be ready to change your mind. So I think it was a lesson in humility for me, for sure, of being able to recognize when you're wrong, and maybe as opposed to doubling down, being able to pivot away and lean out and see that there are sort of new evolutions and out there. So these were, again, as a young investor, I've made all the mistakes. These are just a couple that you're just kind of like, be overweight on people, make sure that, again, you don't ignore the red flags. And two is just don't be so wed to your worldview where you're not willing to stay agile and change your mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's this repetition of like rolling with winners and, being around the right tribe. So are there, when you think about even just building your own network as an investor, your own community, what are some of those questions that you ask or things that you look for?
Yeah, I think it's, the lazy way of doing it in some ways is to go through sort of societal identifiers. So what do I mean that? Oh, there is, I am Iranian. Let me find fellow Iranians that are sort of in the venture ecosystem. Or I am a woman. Let me go and find fellow women in the venture ecosystem. I think that can be effective as an introduction, as in meaning it's a conduit for you to actually meet people who could potentially be sort of values aligned. But I think it's less important for me than finding people who actually in some ways think very differently than me. So I actually seek diversity. I think the most fruitful sort of professional relationships that I have are with people who think very, very differently than I do. So actually, my best friend is also a VC. And the reason that we have an intellectual sort of discourse is because he thinks very differently than I do. I mean, it's as if we're on the opposite ends of spectrum. If I say it's going to go left, he says it's going to go right. And I think what's really fruitful about that type of sort of person in your life is going back to don't get wed to your theses and don't your worldview. That person tends to offer some of the holes in your argument. Because I think we're, as human beings, we tell ourselves so many stories. Life is in stories and in narratives, right? They're so clean, and there's all these sort of logical loops of how one thing leads to the next thing. And I think if you don't have someone to be like, actually, your logic is completely flawed from point A to point B, you end up getting caught in this loop, and you have a love affair with your own thoughts. And so I very purposefully seek people that are actually outside of societal identifiers, maybe, or outside of things that, would feel very intuitive for me, because there are people who might have a lot of things in common with me. It's more, again, seeking out the people that maybe from a values perspective are aligned, but from a thought process actually have some diversity of thinking.
So it's like actively rejecting labels, at least external labels.
Yeah, I think it's actually just going 1 degree deeper, right? So again, you may be using some of these identifiers as like I said, it's a powerful conduit, right? If you go to a women's VC meetup, it's amazing. It's going to be people who have a lot of shared experiences with you, but maybe again, doing another layer of analysis and saying, am I purposefully putting myself into a little bit of groupthink? And do I need to go and seek out people who have just a very different set of experiences than me? Because that person is going to be more colorful or is going to be more powerful in actually coloring my thought process than someone who thinks exactly like me. So it's it's against human nature. It feels really uncomfortable because it's so much better to be with your tribe and people who just like they understand your complaints about your various sort of life experiences. But I try to stay a little bit disciplined with that because again, it's easy to get caught up in that groupthink, and you start to kind of definitely limit yourself a little bit to a bubble.
And so, I mean, I think that speaks to what you've done in terms of launching new themes and going outside of the box. So as you look towards the future, what are some of the ways in which you're looking for new themes? Are you traveling different places? Are you asking for connections through your network?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's I wish it was so programmatic, but it's unfortunately not. It's so inspiration comes from different places. So obviously during COVID, we haven't done a lot of traveling. Sometimes it really helps to obviously walk the streets of Indonesia or Mexico and get a good sort of internal understanding of what's happening. But sometimes these sparks come from really random places where it would be, I'm a huge consumer of content, especially long form content. And it might be, a book that I'm reading that, most of what I read tends to be nonfiction. So it might be something about, I don't know, the Argentine debt crisis, and it'll get me sort of down a rabbit hole. And I think a lot of venture is actually, and a lot of moonshot type of venture is about, following the thread of curiosity. So if something sparks, being like, okay, let me dig a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper. And you start to kind of have, a fairly good understanding of maybe a specific problem once you kind of follow that curiosity. And again, the sparks of genius can come from anywhere. It can be, again, sort of books that I'm reading. It could be my dad, he will, especially when it comes to things like financial inclusion, he has a lot of opinions, having lived through a lot of it. Some of it's from life experiences. Again, like I said, growing up in Iran, sort of a lot of these, it doesn't take imagination for me at all to understand, let's say, a use case for a Bitcoin, because I've lived it, right? So it's very it doesn't take a long, thoughtful, process. When again, you are the consumer that it seeks to serve. So yeah, I think it can come from anywhere. I think again, I'm someone who just even before my role at Prosus, I'm an explorer and an adventurer. So I love sort of being in different markets and speaking to different people. So, they can color the understanding, but it can be just really from a varied group of sources.
That's awesome. And I think it speaks to the creativity inherent in investing that sometimes people miss.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy because I look at a platform like Republic, and I think the traditional financial world has this concept, and let me preface this by saying it's 100% a bias that I don't believe is true, that somehow retail or the average person cannot have these sparks of genius, right? That it is somehow the institutional investor that is privy to these thought processes. And I think a platform like Republic is proving that that's just not true, right? It's any person can sort of be going through their day-to-day life and identify a problem and start to chase their curiosities and see, hey, this doesn't work or that doesn't work, and go on a platform like Republic and be able to sort of find a company that speaks to that theme. So, we're just doing it maybe at an institutional scale, but, that's accessible to anyone today. So I guess some of the advice I would give to your listenership is to follow those curiosities. That's the venture process. We like to use fancy words for it, but that's the venture process, is chasing some of these curiosities with zeal, and, making some investment decisions that, especially if you're doing sort of early stage investing, that are directionally true. So yeah, again, that again can be done at any level with any amount of money.
Mm. And so what are some of the most interesting trends you're seeing globally that, have piqued your curiosity?
Yeah, there's a few. So we've talked a lot about financial access. I think that obviously is something that, if you look at the 2 billion people on the planet that are unbanked, there is a huge, not only sort of commercial opportunity, but there's a whole host of sort of services that can be offered to a population that obviously today is offline from a financial standpoint. So I think that's a trend that I continue to be very excited about, and that can be it could be categories anywhere from challenger banks to investment platforms, right? So Republic's obviously one of our portfolio companies and speaks to that theme of investment management. There are others that we're excited about around the world. We've invested in a few in Southeast Asia and others, one in Europe. So again, it's a theme that we I think directionally can see that the democratization of finance is happening in real time. So whether it's the unbanked coming online, the underbanked in a meaningful way, sort of demanding a better level of service, and all these other sort of financial services that will be accessible to them as a result. So I think that's a theme that has been cooking for 5 years. It's probably going to be cooking for another 25, and probably meaningfully impacted by things like blockchain, especially when it comes to the plumbing. I think that's a lot of innovation is happening there. The rise of e-commerce, especially in emerging markets, is another sort of, I would say it's at this point, it's not a best kept secret. It's obviously happening with gusto and zeal. And so we are excited about some of the trends there, whether it's the platforms themselves or enablement plays. Like I said, we were investors in Shipper in Indonesia and Elastic Run in India and 99 Minutos in Mexico. So these are all sort of in the same bucket of trends that we see. So I think that those two trends are very, very prominent. There's lots of subcategories that go within each. And yeah, I think it's sort of thematically we're seeing that these things are developing in real time.
Awesome. And so obviously you have a global focus. You focus on the Americas. Where do you see the next moonshot coming from?
It can come from anywhere. I sincerely mean that. So it's we go where opportunity takes us, and that's usually been that's been the process. I would say DNA going back to our Naspers days. We were a South African company, newspaper company that somehow managed to evolve to providing TV services, then becoming an internet player, then being the largest shareholder in Tencent. So these are so many evolutions, and the DNA or the core belief there, and it's one where I definitely strongly identify with, is innovation can come from anywhere. And moonshots can come from anywhere. So we don't have geographical barriers. We truly believe they're man-made in nature. We definitely don't have sort of this geographical kind of constraint. I think the likelihood of some moonshots happening within categories are probably higher. And there's sort of a confluence of different technical trends that are coming together that will likely yield sort of outsized outcomes. So whether it's categories like blockchain or synthetic biology or quantum computing, the chances of a moonshot happening in these sort of highly technical emerging technologies is probably higher than consumer in the US or a developed market, right? We're at a point of the S-curve of innovation in a lot of those markets where, we're essentially innovating on the margins, right? Where again, you're getting incremental improvements. And so building very, very large businesses around that is going to be tougher. Again, if you're trying to probability weight it, than let's say building a giant sort of consumer business in India, right? Where maybe you have a little bit more opportunity when it comes to, building a platform for the masses, or, a market like Southeast Asia or Latin America. So again, I go back to innovation can come from anywhere. The probability of moonshots happening within some categories is higher than others, and within some geographies higher than others.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom and your experience. Final question for you. What does profit to the people mean to you?
Profit to the people means to me, going back to a lot of what we've talked about, actually, the democratization of finance. And that includes things like profit pools, right? So I think it's about going back to you were asking what I'm passionate about, right? So I think, there has been a lot of macro activity that, has gotten us on a path where there's a little bit of concentration of affluence. There's a little bit of concentration of power. There's a concentration of overall economic prosperity. And I think there's a lot of sort of technology trends that challenge that and that look to, again, widen the base to take what's starting to accrue very much the top of the pyramid and start to create these on-ramps and these access points where, you have a lot of these profit pools being able to be distributed in a massive way to those who help really create them. So to me, again, it's about the base of the funnel now having some mechanism through technology to be able to really participate in the fruits of their labor.
Well, thank you so much again. I've learned so much about moonshots and just how to be creative, how to personally really seek out the best sorts of entrepreneurs that vibe with me personally. And I'm sure so many of the listeners are thinking about how they can think about their own personal thesis as it pertains to how they'll invest. So thank you again for being a part of the Republic family and for being on Profit to the People.
Anytime, Lisa. Thanks for the time.
This podcast is provided for educational purposes only by Republic and Republic.co. Nothing discussed should be construed as legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. The views of the presenters may not be the views of Republic and its affiliates. Always consult with trusted professional advisors before making investments. Private investments are inherently illiquid and may result in a total loss. All rights reserved.